Well, it's the media's job to try and help people understand the conflict, and that means talking to all the stakeholders on all sides of it. There's a real urgency to try and historicise what's going on, because unless you can see it in its historical context, you know, without that, then you're very prone to the interpretation that it's these individual nasty, evil terrorists, and they just have to be stopped. You know, you have to obfuscate, you know, the last 100 years of history to enable that kind of interpretation to flourish. And politicians are doing it. The media is not set up to tell us, to give us a historical perspective, because the genres of news reporting, you know, happen in particular kinds of time frames. So unless you're watching documentaries or reading books or coming to public lectures, you're not accessing that historical perspective.
You know, here in the Western world, we have a neatly coherent approach to news, discourse, and journalism in general, to the extent that nothing seems remarkably questioning, nothing seems abrupt. You know, everything operates in a deeply predictable way. Whereas, I mean, you can get Fox News in much of the Arab world now. They're watching CNN, they're watching BBC, they're watching Al Jazeera and a variety of other Arab stations, including Iranian stations. And, I mean, Al Arabiya and Dubai and you name it. I mean, they become savvy viewers of and consumers of information. So they can flick through the stations and piece together a cognitive puzzle about what is happening in the world in a way that we cannot do. I mean, in a way that we're actually quite devoid, because we're only exposed to one version of a story.
The only reason why 30 million people in the largest global gathering in human history could be ignored is because fear, war and violence is marketed and promoted in the media instead of peace. Common sense told me I had to question the craziness of it all and the cost. How mad is it that we spend millions on preventive health programs to save people and at the same time spend billions on military preemption campaigns to blow them up? 90% of the victims of these campaigns are civilians who are no different than you or me. What would it be like if it was us, not them, caught up in the crossfire?
Wars and conflicts are generational. You know, they just didn't start yesterday or last year or 5 years ago. It's something that's been an ongoing thing that people didn't pick up. They didn't pick up the secondary process. You know, they saw what was happening primarily. You know, okay, they're colonized, we got them subjected, or we took their land, or we're subjugating their religion. But we don't pick up underneath. They're not happy.
Families have the same basic view of life, I think, wherever they are, whatever their color, race, religion, they want food for their kids, they want security, they want peace, they want an environment in which they can make progress. And there are, I think, basic instincts which attach to all people. We have been led to believe by those in authority, but Muslims are different. From a Muslim's point of view, we've got an infidel army invading and occupying a Muslim country. And a lot of people will go and fight to get rid of that set of circumstances.
War never has been and never will be a way to bring safety to women and children, whether in Iraq or anywhere else. Australia collaborated with the bombing of cities and towns where women and children, young people and old, were living.
The kind of carnage that we create is totally undescribable. After a while, people just desensitize to all this, and we think it gets better. It basically makes them as zombies. The scene of blood and guts and the such strewn against walls and streets just basically doesn't move them anymore. And we are creating that. We are part and parcel of creating that.
You know, there's this terrible story of a man whose son's been wounded badly and they can't leave the house to take him to the hospital. and he dies at home. Now there's another story about this woman who's trying to look after her 2 kids who are hysterical with fear. That's the way she talks about it. Now, you know, can you even begin to imagine what it must be like for those people?
Iraqis for the past 4 decades have seen their childhood, teenage years and adulthood stolen from them because of war after war after war, after sanctions, after another war, and then an occupation, and then even some more. An entire generation of people born and raised and now have families and children in Iraq have been disrupted physically, morally, spiritually because of the lust for wealth, the lust for hegemony, for power and for influence. Iraq today has seen the destruction of the myth that the Western world brings the gift of civilization, of human rights to nations around the world.
What I witnessed was horrific. I walked through civilian residential areas, areas where ordinary families lived. I walked through fresh pools of blood on the ground. I heard the people screaming in grief. I walked through the debris of what was once 7 houses. I picked up the remnants of the lives of the people who lived there. Shoes, books, tennis rackets, and a small little rag doll.
From a military point of view, you've gone in and you've done what you've said you were going to do. And the long-term implications of something that happens like that has this ripple effect that just goes on and on for generations.
If you have an explosion somewhere, 5 die, usually 20 get injured. And how many of those injured are injured for life? You know, with amputated limbs, will be, you know, in need of help and care forever, living in a country that's been totally obliterated, so they really can't look forward to that, you know, sophisticated social services or caring that we enjoy here today. So basically we leave an entire generation of people for dead.
The next generation of the people who have been through the war, I think they live still in a war zone, you know, through the denial or the cutting off of emotions with older people. And in that group work I was doing, it always came back to the war. So at the end of the life, they always came back to the unresolved issues and the trauma they had.
And nothing is worth it. Nothing is worth it. Absolutely nothing is worth it. And you know, a child that has seen her father or mother or loved one killed in front of her eyes, you know, imagine the scars. Imagine the mental scars. It's just horrific. I mean, it's just not for a child to have or to have to endure. But unfortunately, that's the situation we create, and all under, you know, trying to bring democracy and freedom and human dignity, and it's just absolutely a lie.
We want this war to be war of liberation, a war of hearts and minds. And as I keep saying, we lost the heart and minds because the heart and minds in the grave now. If you think about the grave is finished, not at all. The grave is continuous from that time till this moment. Now, the police forces in the army, who are supposed to be trained even by your own troops in Iraq, trained on preservation of a human right, this police and army breaches all the basics of human right. Torturing in these small cells, nobody knows where they are, secret prisons, torture by electricity, cutting, extraction in eyes, awful thing that you never ever can imagine a human being do with a human being.
You get over 1,000 people a month being murdered in Baghdad alone in the wake of this invasion. That's 1,000 plus people shot, murdered, beheaded, tortured, left dumped in the streets, who wouldn't have been if this hadn't happened.
If we allow ourselves, in Australia or in Britain or the United States or the Western world generally, if we allow ourselves to either commit or allow the act of injustice against other people's children to be committed, one day we will be struck at home, and that fills me with horror. I do not wish for the children of Australia, Britain, the United States, or anyone to be harmed as a result of what their fathers and grandparents committed to other people's children.
I am personally and like socially, politically committed to this, coming back to be able to feel our own emotions and our own social grief. It's time for grief now. We have to see what's happening.
You wanna help me, and I'll help you. This is my history. I'm David Gulpilil, Never-Ending Story, and I am here. And I want you to do something further good for me and for the future generation children living in Australia. Not mine, not yours, but for our future generations.
There were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, and no one is saying sorry. Whether you like it or not, we are responsible for the decision our leaders made, even though the majority of us were opposed to the invasion. And will the people who have suffered there ever forget? We remember our losses to this day, won't they?
Sometimes I lie awake thinking, here I am as a man in a man's world. And look at all the damage we've done to the planet.
In our world, the grandmother's voices should be heard in the decision-making process that affect all people.
Do you think women should play a bigger role in politics?
In everything. Mother is something really can do a lot, all those mothers together.
There's some men who are really in touch with the mother inside of them, because we all have it. It's all inside of us. I call it matriotism instead of patriotism. Matriotism is a love of all humanity, not your country. It's a love of everybody's children, not just your own children.
We need new generation, we need new leaders, have a love for the land and for the Mother Earth and for everyone.
There has to be some sort of solution as far as beyond the governments. I would say that there is the power of the people, but how do you do it? How do you get there?
The history of social change is, it didn't start in parliaments, it started in the community. People who cared about an issue came out and spoke about it, and occasionally it got to a point that so many people were speaking on that issue that a couple of people in parliament listened and made that change. And that's the whole history of the way social change has occurred.
So you think power for the people?
Well, it has to be, and that's the only way that we've ever created change.
One of the things that people often focus on when they look at social movements is those big waves. The point is, any social movement and any movement for peace can't be built just around those big waves. There's always a moment between the waves. Those moments are the moments where the most work needs to be done.